Yeah, I mean, I think every election right impacts and affects our community, the undocumented community, the immigrant community. And I think what we really saw right in 2016 was the attacks to our community in very concrete ways. Especially, I won't ever forget when DACA got rescinded, right, in July of 2017. I was traveling at the time. I was in Mexico, but just the conversations, the text messages that people were having of unknowing what was going to happen, right? Being feared and feeling like people were being pushed back into the shadows when it took so much for community members to rally when Obama was having his reelection and really hold him and that the party and the administration accountable for the promises made during campaigns and then the lack of the follow through and the commitment. And I think one of the reasons that so much work has been done at the state level here in Illinois is because what we saw happen federally. And it's like, can we protect our state and how can we ensure that we have laws that take place and take precedent over whatever happens federally, right? As a state, we can't give status to anyone, but what are those things that we can do to prevent someone from potentially being deported, right? The collaboration that there was between law enforcement and ICE, and we're still working on some of that data stuff, especially in Cook County. But I think that was something that was really a turning point of, yes, we'll continue to fight and organize federally, but how do we ensure that at the state level, people have everything they need to have the best lives that they can have? 2 years ago, asked someone that was running for county clerk or county board in my district about immigration. And he's like, well, that's not something that, is part of my job here right now. And I was like, but I still want to know, like, what your stance on citizenship for all is. And they didn't want to answer the question, right? And it's valid in the sense of, yes, they're not going to vote for that legislation, but are there things that the county can be doing to make the space more welcoming for our immigrant community? Absolutely. So I know that they thought it was unfair that I was asking them this question. I'm like, you came to my parents' door wanting their vote, I'm going to ask you these questions. And, my partner was like, out of all the doors that someone could have knocked and someone actually opened, of course you were at your parents' house to grill this person. I was like, pobrecitos, I know. It's bad luck because honestly, when we're knocking doors, again, a shout out to all you all, people don't pick up. People don't open the doors. And I know. I also was raised that way. Mis papás me decían, si alguien viene a la puerta y no los conocemos, no vamos a abrir. But we just want to remind you that there's an election. And if you don't want that reminder, go and vote early and you will be taken off our list.
Welcome to Through Immigrant Eyes, a podcast created by the Center for Immigrant Progress in hopes of amplifying and uplifting immigrant voices. As a grassroots organization, we believe that to empower our community, we must first listen to what they have to say. I'm your host, Karina Alvarez, and we're joined today by Celeste Flores. Thank you, Celeste, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So today we're going to have a conversation about immigration, the upcoming elections, and just see, how we're feeling, how the community's feeling right now prior to the election. So why don't we just start off by you introducing yourself? I mean, a lot of people know who Celeste is. She's everywhere in the community, but for those who may not know you, can you talk about your background and your experience?
Yeah, so, Celeste Flores, I'm the daughter of Mexican immigrants. I'm first generation college student, born and raised in Lake County. And I've been, working in the community, doing community organizing since I graduated. I did a year of AmeriCorps, so I came back to community 2014. So I've been, I've worked in different nonprofits, at a church, and, just trying to, leave behind a better world. And I think through community organizing, I learned that you can make real change in your community. I would say that if someone had told me when I was younger that I could get paid to talk and get people together, I would have known what I wanted to do, but I had no idea what I was going to do with my life. And I think the person that graduated college would have had no idea the career and the trajectory that I have now.
Yeah. I think she would be very proud.
Thanks.
Yeah. So what has inspired you to do community organizing? I know you just said like a younger version of you would not think that you would be in this sort of position. So what inspired you in the first place to do community organizing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my parents have been a huge influence in my life. I'm a cradle Catholic, and growing up, we went to church every weekend, and íbamos a misa en español, we went to mass in Spanish, and I didn't know Catholics were conservative or considered conservative until I went off to college, because what I always heard was about helping those in need, helping the poor, and like the environment and taking care of it. So I think I saw them involved and them giving back to the community, which got me at a young age to volunteer and do things and be involved with youth ministry and travel. And from there, I didn't realize that they were organizing their community. My dad's the first one that took me out to the doors to knock, nonpartisan, to let people know that there's an election. And we were doing that through the church, right? So I think once my parents really wanted me to go to college. I didn't really know what that meant, but I did it because I'm the oldest. I'm female, right? We can go down all of those things and how I'm an Aquarius if someone, wants to know. Don't know too much about all that stuff, but that really shaped me. And I think I didn't realize until I moved back and started working at my local church and trying to get them to recycle that I learned that there was community organizing happening and kind of putting names to things that I saw. And from there realized that I could continue doing that and impact the community in a way when it came to policy. Also, Catholic Church doesn't know what to do with young people that aren't married. Sorry, got to put it out there, right? So it was difficult to, figure out what my place was there. And what I felt like I learned when I joined more of the organizing in the community world was that there was a place of belonging. There wasn't a pressure to get married and have kids and all that other stuff. And so from there, I think for me to feel empowered and then seeing other people feel empowered to make a change, what led me to continuing to do this day in and day out. Awesome.
So now, taking a turn to talk about immigration, you did mention that this is a topic that's very important to you as a daughter of immigrants. So you are I feel like someone who's out there in the community who also knows a lot about the policies when it comes to immigration. And so can you explain to our listeners the types of policies that have recently come out regarding immigration?
Yeah, there's several. We won't go down the whole list. I did take some notes because I figured it was good to, maybe highlight some stuff. But really at the state level, I think these last 12 years, the community has been educating themselves, educating lawmakers, voting in different individuals that share those same values. And because of that, I entered the immigration movement space officially, through work in 2021, but obviously I was involved way before that when I was in high school. We had the big marchas where we all were not going to school. The only people that went to school that day at Warren were the Puerto Ricans. We've forgiven them since then. But, that was all the work that I was, involved with, again, because of my parents. But really what we see now is one of the most important legislations, in my opinion, that just took effect this July was 10 years ago, the undocumented community organized and they rallied and they were able to get a permit to be able to drive in the state of Illinois. And it was only a permit to drive. You couldn't use it as a state ID. So if you were going to your Walgreens or your local pharmacy to pick up medication, you couldn't use it as a form of identification. And since then, and because we've seen the different struggles that people have with it, we were able to move that because now we have the real IDs where anyone that has a TVDL, the temporary visitor's driver's license, can switch over to a regular license. So when someone is pulled over for any reason, the police officer also won't automatically know that individual status. So if you have a TVDL, all you need to do is go to the DMV and make that change, and you'll just get a regular driver's license that's red instead of the purple that we've seen for the last 10 years. So that's one that I wanted to highlight at the state level. Obviously, we know at the federal level, a lot has been up and down, and just wanted to highlight the administration's efforts when it came to parole in place, right? So we're looking at eligible and documented immigrant spouses of U.S. citizens and their stepchildren can apply for work permits and begin the pathway to a legal status and citizenship. Unfortunately, because this was not done legislatively, we are in the process of figuring out what is actually going to take place. It's kind of in a limbo in the sense of everything that we saw with DACA and Obama's administration. Now we're seeing with this potential parole in place. So we're still waiting to know exactly what's going to happen. But people can start getting their documentations ready, talking to their lawyer, talking to trusted organizations as how they can prepare everything they need to be able to submit things.
Yeah, I feel like basically the same thing that happened with DACA is happening with parole in place of, these very conservative states who are very opposed to, immigration, trying to block, a program that would help so many people and so many families. So the election is right around the corner, but I also kind of wanted to review past elections, like the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and kind of what the response was to those results in the community, not just of course community members, but also organizations and community leaders. At the time I was a student, I think I was in high school, and I feel like I didn't know what was going on, so could you maybe give us some insight of what was going on during those times?
Yeah, I think every election, right, impacts and affects our community, the undocumented community, the immigrant community, and I think what we really saw, right, in 2016 was the attacks to our community in very concrete ways. Especially, I won't ever forget when DACA got rescinded, right, in July of 2017. I was traveling at the time. I was in Mexico, but just the conversations, the text messages that people were having of unknowing what was going to happen, right, being feared and feeling like people were being pushed back into the shadows when it took so much for community members to rally when Obama was having his reelection and really hold him and that the party and the administration accountable for the promises made during campaigns and then the lack of the follow through and the commitment. And I think one of the reasons that so much work has been done at the state level here in Illinois is because what we saw happen federally. And it's can we protect our state and how can we ensure that we have laws that take place and take precedent over whatever happens federally, right? As a state, we can't give status to anyone, but what are those things that we can do to prevent someone from potentially being deported, right? The collaboration that there was between law enforcement and ICE, and we're still working on some of that data stuff, especially in Cook County. But I think that was something that was really a turning point of, yes, we'll continue to fight and organize federally, but how do we ensure that at the state level, people have everything they need to have the best lives that they can have?
Yeah, definitely. I also remember when DACA was rescinded, because I was actually like one of the last, I guess, like round of people that got DACA, because I got my DACA in 2017, right before it got rescinded, and I always felt like I was so close, and a lot of people, live with that reality that they couldn't apply for DACA because of, the restrictions about like the dates and stuff like that. And I don't know. It just makes me reflect on law and be grateful. But also like realizing that it's not enough, right? DACA's not enough, but also trying to do what we can here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to like this election, I'm curious to know like what your stance is, or not your stance, but like how you think immigration has been handled this election cycle, like by the candidates, both presidentially, but maybe also locally.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see it every year, right? Immigration used as one of the talking points, something that divides the community, a way to try to get people to come out and vote. And what we know, right? I was just at a lunch earlier today where the Latino Victory Fund was speaking, and that the Latino community is going to be voting in the voting aspect. There's more and more eligible individuals to vote, and how it's going to become a majority eventually. And so really it's that one thing of like, okay, how do you get that person to register? And then how do you actually make sure they come out and vote? And what is the thing that's going to bring them out to vote? And I think because our community is so diverse, with countries, with languages, with cultures, right? There's not just one thing that brings the Latino community out to vote. And I think both parties have tried using a pathway to citizenship as like the carrot, but then those promises aren't fulfilled, right? So I think it's really hard to say one thing is going to bring out this huge population to come out and vote. And I think that's why, even though we've been able to win so many things, like especially in the state of Illinois, right, like the driver's license and other legislation, we still don't have that representation when it comes to elected office too, right? And it doesn't have to always be that way, but you would hope that the values would align, right? If you're growing up in the same community and going through the same things. And I mean, both parties, I feel like, have said things that are right now that are running, both candidates that are running, that I don't agree with, right? But, and I know I like specifically wrote down different things because I went to their websites, right? Because that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to look up these people. You're not, you're supposed to ask people. So it's like, okay, what do they put on their website? What is this Project 2025 everyone's talking about? And I was in a room recently where like, yeah, if we actually polled people wouldn't even be able to tell you what this means, right? Because maybe you hear it because it's on your social media or with your friends, but does the everyday voter go to this? Do they read about it, right? And one of the things that I was reading on Project 2025 is the Remain in Mexico program, right? We saw that already under Trump's administration. And I didn't travel, but I had other friends that traveled to the border during that time. And again, right, just dehumanizing people living, right, waiting for things to come together, those tents, everything, right? So all of this is proposed and things that the administration, that, Trump's administration is looking to do. Another thing that I didn't know was like a formal thing was the overturning of the Flores settlement agreement. In 1997, court-approved agreement that serves as a national policy on how to humanely treat minors who enter the country illegally. According to other things, the agreement prohibits the federal government from detaining minors for more than 20 days. So they're looking to eliminate this, right? They're looking to be able to detain people for who knows how long. We saw that, right? We saw those images of the children, of the adults in cages. So it's just bringing all that back. another thing, Trump is trying to do is, to repeal the diversity visa program and and move from a family-based to a merit-based system from admitting immigrants, which is really hypocritical because his own wife was able to obtain status because of this and her family, right? The other thing that I read, again, was a program that they're talking about as a humanitarian parole program. So for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, and the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival Program, DACA, which bars the deportation of certain people, right? He's trying to repeal this and make all these people eligible to be deported. Obviously, when I go on and look at Harris and what, she has on there, there was a lot of what they talked about in her website was the bipartisan Senate National Security Agreement, which was a bill that they were looking at voting earlier this year around the early part of 2024. And so they were looking at sending over money, but then they were also going to limit how many visas were going to be people could enter to, right? So, and when I say money, they were looking for money to reinforce the border and security and everything else like that. So, it wasn't a bill that the immigrant community was behind, in my opinion, at least from the people that I spoke with. But that's what they're leading with, right? So really, I think when it comes to administrations and the way that I think about it, I think about what administration do I want to be organizing against when it comes to federal things, because neither of them are saying citizenship for all. So then for me, it's like, well, am I trying to fight the parole in place, or am I trying to fight expanding visas to more individuals? And it's unfortunate that we, at least in the system that the U.S. has in the two-party system, is that these are kind of the choices. We could talk about, I always used to say, well, in the primaries, you have more options, but that was not the case this year because the current incumbent was supposed to be running, and he was a Democrat, so the Democrats did not have a primary. The Republicans sort of tried to have a primary, but it was pretty, from the very beginning, it felt like Trump was going to be the nominee, that it was going to be Trump and Biden. I wasn't on my bingo card that Biden would step down. I know a lot of my other friends thought he would, and they were like, this is going to happen, Celeste. And I was like, not going to happen. I really did not see that coming and did not expect to now have Harris on the ticket at all.
Yeah. I know, like, for me personally, and I've talked to a lot of my friends about this, I'm very disappointed, but not surprised. Which sucks, like, that it gets to a point where I don't want to say you expect the worst, but, like, you kind of feel like you have to prepare for that. And one of the things that I'm also noticing is this increased, like, stance on both sides of the aisle of, like, being hard on immigration. Like we're hard on immigration, and it, like, parallels, I think, the whole, like, war on drugs, right? And how, like, each party was trying to take, like, we're, like, hard on drugs, like, meaning, like, they're for, like, getting rid of them and, all that stuff, and taking these, like, really harsh policies, right? And, like, I feel like that's what's starting to happen with immigration. Like you said, I feel like I don't see, at least, like, on the federal level, like, these calls for citizenship for all, for, visas and a pathway to citizenship, right? I don't see that. at least on the federal level. And it's like, why not? you know? But yeah, it's very disappointing, I think. But I think that's what like drives me to get more informed and like just try and do something. I think especially as like someone who can't vote, I look for what ways or in what ways can I get involved.
Yeah. No, and I think, again, it's how do you, what keeps someone involved? What keeps someone doing stuff, right? 2021 is the perfect year where there was so much conversation federally, not only about immigration, but about healthcare, about environment. And I saw, and I was part of that movement that kept increasing the pressure for our senator, Dick Durbin, because he's, you know, the senior here in our in Illinois, but also at that time was majority whip, and it's like we had rallies, we had calls to action, and then we had to step it up, right? Because when you're organizing, when you're talking to people and you're not getting the answer you want, you have to like keep increasing that pressure, get more people to call, more people to do those petitions, showing up to someone's house, someone's condo, and then the most keep going, and then, you know, the potential of getting arrested. And all of that was happening, right? People were coming together. We had different organizations working, having those conversations of what are we okay with passing, right? Like if it's not citizenship for all, is it a bust? Is it something else? And having to have those real life conversations of what is actually going to be written if we actually get something, what's that compromise? And for someone like me, I'm like, there's no compromise. We need citizenship for all. And then we had Manchin just not only conversations about immigration, but he just said, I'm not voting for anything. Everything in December of 2021, like there was no path forward. The window had closed. And then it's to your point, as you started off this podcast, it's like, what is the community feeling? What does the community want to do? And people were exhausted. We were traveling to Chicago, we were traveling to DC, and people were like, why are we doing this if there's no pathway, right? What does this mean? And I know other people that have continued doing that work and in other states continuing to organize. But at some point, you know, what is that self-care? We talk about self-care and everything else, all these things we tell the community. And at what point do the leaders also do that to recharge, to be able to continue doing that fight? Because it's not going to happen overnight. And I think we've seen with previous administrations, you need to have the votes. And if you don't have the votes, we can talk everything we want to say, but if there's not going to be a deal at the end of the day, if there's no pen to paper, are we going to continue to ask our community to show up, to re-traumatize themselves by sharing their stories to either people they know or complete strangers? At what point do we need to regroup and think about how do we get involved politically? Do you create that C4? Do you create those PACs that do that impact? Because there's only so much that nonprofits can do. And at the end of the day, we need better people that are in office that are aligned with our values and will vote the way that the community is asking them to vote. And we currently don't have that federally.
Yeah. So right now you're working with Mano a Mano as a civic engagement director, or remind me of your title.
Titles, they're all made up. Director of Community Building. So I oversee our Democracy in Action program, which has our Liderazgo program. That's a 3-day young professional cohort, and we do alumni events. And then it's got our civic engagement arm, and then our state legislation, our federal legislation is kind of the gist of what I oversee.
Yeah, so I know right now you guys are working on like get out the vote efforts, and so just want to like check in, like how's that going? You know, what are you seeing in the community right now in terms of like voting? Like people registered? Like what's going on?
Yeah, so we're working with the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, ICER. Through them, we've had a fellow, and it's nothing new in Lake County. It's my first year doing the program with them through Mano. I know that Mano has hosted fellows in the past. I also know Most Blessed Trinity, the church that I was referring to earlier, also has had fellows. I know other organizations have had fellows, and I can name you several of them that are doing amazing work now in the community that started off as a fellow. And so we currently have one that's placed here. So ICER has this all across the state, and she's amazing. Cassandra has been knocking doors every weekend, talking to voters, has a small but mighty crew of volunteers also knocking doors. And we decided this year to focus in North Chicago, which is where we're located right now, in our North Chicago office, because when I came in, one of the things that we wanted to look at was what is going on in the immigrant community when it comes to being civically involved. What do people know? What do people not know? And kind of had to do like an analysis of the whole county and realize there's a lot of areas we could be focusing on, a lot of different municipalities. But Lake County is pretty big, and I'm one person, and how do we actually make this happen? So after looking at everything, and there were many factors as to why North Chicago was the place we wanted to pick, one of them being that 12 years ago, the school board was, doing things that were not the best, corrupt, illegal. So the Illinois State Board of Education, ISB, came in and replaced that board. That superintendent was asked to leave, and they have been appointing the school board these last 12 years. And there's no requirement for the people that serve on the board to live in the community. And at that time, we were hearing from the community kind of like, hey, like, what's going on here? It's been a moment. There's a plan here to bring it back, but we haven't. What's going on? And because of that, and because of the engagement of the community with the state, it was decided that they were going to start transitioning back to elected. So in 2025, they will elect 3 school board members for the first time in over 12 years. And the engagement and the voter turnout in North Chicago is really small. And I think it's because there hasn't been that kind of engagement to get the community out, because there's one less board for people to be engaged with potentially. Mm-hmm. And so for us, it was important to, how to remind people that there's an election now in November for presidential, because that's what everyone's going to be seeing on the news. That's what people are going to get mails about. Your phone, I'm sure you've had to do a stop reply or opt out for the last month or so. Probably getting more random calls that are going straight to voicemail. And we wanted to see, if we have this opportunity with the fellow for 2024, how can we then be able to use that momentum for 2025? Because there's not usually those ads on the TV. Mm-hmm. Maybe you'll get a mailer, maybe you'll get a text message, but really, those campaigns are so much smaller, so much less money goes into them, that we wanted to be like, how can we make sure that we use this as an opportunity for Mano to be able to have a year-round program, and how do we look for funding that is year-round and not just during those peak moments, so that we can have a volunteer base that is robust and encompassing for the next general election, where maybe it's not the presidential, but we'll have, at least in Illinois, you'll have one of your senators that's up, right? So it's been going great. And I think one of the big things we have been hearing at the doors, which has been surprising to me, is people unaware that they can vote, especially those that have been formerly incarcerated, not knowing that in the state of Illinois, once you've served your time, you can re-register to vote. And for me, it was something that we're trying to engage and are in conversations with other organizations so that we can make sure that that's something that the whole community knows, right? Like, our immigrant community, our Latino community should know, but every community member should know about that. And I'm hoping that that will continue to build partnerships between the Latino community and the Black community, and how do we continue to build those bridges so that when we're asking for things, we're asking for things together to our legislators, and not feeling like we're competing for the same pie, because the pie is made up, the amount of money is made up. Everyone can be given the money that they need to thrive. We saw that during the pandemic. We saw how quickly we had a vaccine. So again, we're stronger when we know each other, when we're working together, and even if we are not completely aligned in our ask, at least knowing what our asks are and being able to have each other's backs.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, the work that you guys are doing is very much needed, and I'm glad someone in the community is doing that. So regarding voter turnout, like, what do you think are the biggest challenges for that, specifically like in our community here in Lake County?
Yeah, I mean, one, a plug for people to vote early is that if you vote, you won't be getting those mailers, you won't get those text messages, because campaigns look at that and don't send you things if you've already voted. I know some people like to vote the day of, which is great, but you never know what might happen. So I'm a big fan of voting early. During the pandemic, obviously, did voting by mail. My parents prefer to vote in person. I was trying to get them to do the mail because I'm like, you get it at home, you can do all your research, you can look for the websites, you can do all this information. But I think, unfortunately, there's a lot that is put on the individual voter to do and to understand. And most people are working their one job or their two jobs, raising kids, doing extracurricular activities for them, and don't have the time to think about voting. I didn't vote when I was in college. I mean, I could have asked for my ballot in the mail. I saw, and again, my parents, since they've been able to vote, have voted in every single election, no matter how small it was or how big it was. I remember going with them. I remember my mom's first time voting. It was something that I was raised with, but that's not something that you see in all these communities and all these families. So I think it's a very much an individual decision that you need to make to vote for whatever reason. And again, for me, it's the example my parents have given me. And so how can individuals that don't have that, individuals that are working those two jobs, that have kids, right? Like, what is the priority for them? What's making them say, you know what, I need to set some time apart to be able to know what everything on my ballot is, to be able to look it up. And what are the campaigns doing? What are the candidates doing? And I don't think that enough is being done, but also if you're a candidate, because I've heard it from my friends, they're looking at people that have registered, right? They want to get that person that signed up to vote by mail because they know the likelihoods of them voting is higher, right? I have some family members that I have asked to vote and say they'll never vote in their life. And I'm like, wow. You need to vote. We have family members that can vote. You need to vote for them, right? But they just don't see it. I have other, it's very unfortunate that there's not a one thing that can fix the low turnout in our community and get them engaged. But I think hopefully people get engaged because of different reasons, because of different things like your podcast that you're doing, maybe a family member telling them like, I can't vote, I need you to vote for me, and that maybe will change them. But, I think we just have to all do our part. We all have to remind people, because sometimes people just forget, and sometimes people don't know. The other thing we've been hearing a lot at the doors is that people didn't know they could vote early. Wow. And we're like, yes, you can already vote now. You can go to the city clerk's office right now. And then on October 21st, it'll be countywide. You can do early voting. So I think the education really is lacking, right? We can think about our school systems. How are they educating and informing the students that are going through the school system to know about the elections? I mean, I learned all about the 3 branches of government and how a bill becomes a law. I'm just a bill. But how do we then, are we incorporating enough the actual election? And I don't know that we are. So I think there's a lot of things that we could be doing. And hopefully, as we all do our part, it will continue to get people to vote more and to engage more, and maybe even inspire them to run for office. I always say there's not a lot of requirements to run for office. People think they have to have all these fancy degrees, and they don't. So how do we demystify the process of who's eligible to run and what's that process of actually running?
Yeah, I think education is like a huge piece of it. Like you said, people are saying that they don't know that they can vote early. My younger sister, this is going to be her first election she can vote. And I kept asking her, are you registered? Are you registered? She's like, no, like I started it, but like I'll go back to it. And like this past weekend when I went to my parents' house, I was like, I'm registering you right now. And like I showed her, and like I basically did it for her. It took like less than 10 minutes. It was like 5 minutes. It was super quick. And I was like, see, like this did not take long. And she was like, can you take me to go like to go vote? And I was like, yes, I'll take you to vote. Like and she's young. She's like, I think she's 20 now. And so it makes me wonder, like, about the youth. Like, what do they know about, like, registering to vote, especially if it's their first time, you know? And then there's that piece of, like, knowing the candidates, right? And what are their stances, and do they align with your values and your morals? And that takes a lot of time. I mean, right now we're doing a voter education series. We're posting on our social medias information about candidates, because that does take a lot of time to like look up, you know, the candidates and do the research and figure out like their priorities and stuff. And even like looking at the incumbents and what they've done in the past. And it can be confusing. And so I think that's a big part of like the work that we can do is just simply educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also how to inform someone, and that's something that we've been doing at Mono. We are not as fancy as doing videos. We've been talking about it though, because we know the algorithm is pushing us towards it. But you know, these past elections, we've been doing swipe post of just giving the information of the offices and what's expected of the individual that holds that title. Because to your point, right, like people can talk about themselves and what they're going to do, but does that actually translate to what they need to do? Maybe not. But then for us, it was also less work because we weren't looking to educate everyone on all the candidates. We were just kind of like, okay, this is what the Senate job is. This is what a state's attorney's job is. And now that you know that, go and look at their website and read their information. Another plug is the League of Women Voters. They do candidate forums. We just did one on the Lake County wide, so the state's attorneys, the circuit clerk, court clerk, and the coroner. Those were recorded. We had the Spanish captions. You could do so we did that because then you could do more than one language. So I'm not sure how accessible the recording will be to non-English speakers. So, you know, obviously still learning and how do we improve things? Because even if we had someone that had been translating it live, that would have not been recorded as well. So again, it's like, how do we make these candidates accessible? And then the other thing is knowing how to know if they're telling the truth or not, because people will put stuff on their website, people will say stuff. But to your point, right, like it's easier with an incumbent to look at their record and what they voted for and what they've stood for and haven't stood for. But when someone's an incumbent, it's hard to know where they're going to land on things. And then the other thing is that sometimes you'll have individuals that run for a lower office and then end up running for something higher. So I know 2 years ago, asked someone that was running for county clerk or county board in my district about immigration. And he's like, well, that's not something that, is part of my job here right now. And I was like, but I still want to know, like, what your stance on citizenship for all is. And they didn't want to answer the question, right? And it's valid in the sense of, yes, they're not going to vote for that legislation, but are there things that the county can be doing to make the space more welcoming for our immigrant community? Absolutely. So I know that they thought it was unfair that I was asking them this question. I'm like, you came to my parents' door wanting their vote. I'm going to ask you these questions. And, my partner was like, out of all the doors that someone could have knocked and someone actually opened, of course you were at your parents' house to grill this person. I was like, pobrecitos, I know. It's bad luck because honestly, when we're knocking doors, again, a shout out to all you all, people don't pick up. People don't open the doors. And I know. I also was raised that way. Mis papás me decían, si alguien viene a la puerta y no los conocemos, no vamos a abrir. But we just want to remind you that there's an election. And if you don't want that reminder, go and vote early and you will be taken off our list. But it is a lot. It's a lot of information for someone to take in. And we're just trying to figure out how do we break it down? How do we make it more accessible so that people feel empowered to make that vote and cast that vote?
Yeah, it's super important. Yeah. So I think that, at least from what I'm seeing, I feel like anything can happen, this November. And so what do you think, like, we can do to prepare for, I guess, either outcome? Because let's be honest with ourselves. No matter which candidate ends up being elected, we're still not going to get citizenship for all. We're not going to get these big legislations that we're asking for, most likely. So what can we do, both like as community leaders, as we're working with these different organizations, or even families? What can we all do to, I guess, prepare ourselves and make sure that and just make sure that we are doing the best that we can, regardless of the outcome?
Yeah, I think taking an active role, and, that's very broad. If you go on our website, we have a whole section about volunteering, especially if you can't vote. But if you can, to vote, right? There's so many people, and so many people that I know individually that can't vote, that would do anything to vote. So if you are a citizen, you're 18 and older, don't have, I don't know, if you can vote, you should vote. There's so many people that wish they could and can't, right? So that, number one. Secondly, right, like, I know it can be a lot, so you have to decide as an individual how much news to follow and how much to keep up with things, because it can be a lot. So you need to know for your own self, like, your well-being, like, if you're on the social media and the doom scrolling, or just, I know a lot of younger folks don't have cable anymore, right? So maybe you aren't listening to that, but finding that trusted source to either just listen to a podcast, to listen to the news. And then regardless of the outcome, doing things that, if you are put in situations, or put yourself in those situations where you are around elected officials, to let them know how you want them to vote on things. At the end of the day, these individuals are your neighbor. And maybe not your, like, immediate neighbor, but they're your neighbor, right? Like, they're representing you. They have to live within some kind of district or some kind of boundary that is close enough to you, where you need to let them know that they should support a pathway to citizenship. And again, at any level, because there's things that their government could probably be doing, their board could be doing. We saw that, right, with the new revivals and that whole conversation. We just, yesterday I was at a library conference and haven't even been able to read the news in with DACA and the appellate court, and I think there ended up not being a hearing, but there was something. I don't know if you followed it more closely.
There was no decision made.
But knowing that, right? Like knowing that and having those conversations, and even if you don't feel like you're fully read in, it's okay. It's okay to not have all the information. It's okay to, if someone that you're talking to isn't elected and ask you more questions, like just be honest and be like, I don't know, but I can go and ask, right? Like reach out to Center for Immigrant Progress, reach out to Mano a Mano, so we can have those conversations, because at the end of the day, they are also human beings and they're also learning everything. They can be experts in all of these issues that they're voting on. And let them know, because they want to know. I had an elected official, and I should remember when year this was. It was in the winter. It was at one of the Christmas tree lightings that these communities have, and I was talking about pathway to citizenship. Maybe it was 2021. I should recall this, especially now that it's going on a podcast potentially. Maybe we should cut this out. And he was like, Celeste, you're always talking to me about pathway to citizenship and how this is something that I need to be supportive and blah, blah, blah. He's like, I go to Waukegan, I go to all these community events where there are Latinos, and no one brings up the issue. And I was like, okay, bet. So what do? I start calling my friends. I was like, when you see this person, I need you to talk to them. They've never mentioned it to me again. They probably don't even remember this happened. But I remember, right? Because it's an issue that impacts me directly. It impacts my family. And at that time, that person was not for a pathway to citizenship, right? It was all about like the merit base, right? Like, well, who are we going to give citizenship to? And it's like, we all deserve it. Everyone deserves it. They're all in this country. They are all contributing to our country and to our finances and our economy. So again, I know it can be scary. I know you might feel like these people are super important. And yes, they have an important role in our community. But regardless of the time, regardless if I'm like, we don't have the votes, they still need to know that this is something we want them to prioritize. Because if they're not hearing it from us, they're hearing other priorities from other people. And that's what they're going to lead with. And until the Latino community comes out in those large numbers to vote, to show up, our issues are going to continue to be kind of, well, if we get to that, we'll do that. There's this other thing that's coming up that we need to vote on. And it's like, no, like we've done this. Like we have seen the community come together and get driver's license. DACA, that would have not happened without individuals that were willing to come out of the shadows and face on an administration that was very popular. Obama was very popular at the time for his reelection, and be like, you need to bring us with you, or else our family members that vote will not come with you, right? Like people show that. And we will continue to show that. We will continue to show up for a community and each other, because that's what we were all raised to do. We were raised to care for one another. We were raised to look after each other. And now we just need to do that in the voting, and those that can vote to vote.
Yeah, I think we need to start leaning. Sorry. I think that we need to start leaning into our power. I feel like so often, like, people feel powerless. They're like, oh, what's my one little vote gonna do? And it's like, it could do a lot.
It does a lot. In North Chicago, my friend that ran for alderman lost by 2 votes.
So yeah, every vote counts, and we have to lean into our power, not just as individuals, but as a collective. And then just to wrap things up, where can people go to register if they're not registered? Where can people go to vote in Lake County?
Yeah, so in the state of Illinois, we've passed a lot of legislation, so there is no excuse. If you are eligible to vote and you are not registered to vote, you can show up, register, and vote on the same day. You can do that up until November 5th. If you're like, that seems like a lot of pressure, I want to be registered beforehand, You still can. I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but
We're gonna
officially,
try and get it up as soon as possible.
officially, that in-person registration with a deputy registrar is closed, but you can still register online until October 20th. You will need your driver's license and your social security and your birthday, everything that I'm presuming you did for your sister on the online. You'll need to have all that information to register, and you'll do it. You can do it yourself, or again, you can do it in person and vote the same day. You can do that at the county clerk's website. Starting October 21st, early voting sites all across Lake County will open, so any of those locations you can do. And then on election day, wherever you would be assigned to vote, you can go and vote. You can also just show up to the county clerk's website. You can ask for Anthony Vega, tell him Celeste Flores sent you. He is our Lake County clerk. He is bilingual, and he's not going to be happy I just said that. He has staff that can help if you need help. You can also reach out, right, to organizations, to nonprofits. We can, tell you where to go. All the information's on our website as well. And then if for some reason you missed the boat, it's after November 5th, you can still register to vote because there are municipal elections. And depending on where you live in Lake County and your municipality, you might have a primary in February of 2025, or you just will have a general election in April of 2025.
Thank you so much for that information, Celeste. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your knowledge with us. Also want to thank our listeners, and remember to get registered to vote and get out and exercise that right. You can check out our social media to get more information, especially if you live in Lake County, about people who are going to be on your ballot. And you can also follow us to get updated on any community events that we will host. I hope that you'll join us for the next one.